Now, when was the first time you ever reported on sage grouse? Do you remember that?
I absolutely remember that because I was pregnant. I was pregnant with my first son, so it would have been 2004. Oh my gosh.
That's right around the time we met.
Yes.
And my wife was pregnant with our first.
So 22 years ago.
Holy cow.
I've been covering sage grouse for two decades at least. But the first time I think probably the first time I covered sage grouse and the first time I went to a lek are not the same time.
Right.
It took a while for me to get biologists to realize that I really wanted to cover these stories, and they really needed to trust me with sensitive information, like where are these birds meeting in the spring.
Uh-huh.
And the challenge with these birds is they meet in the same spot every spring, so they're predictable in that sense. They are so faithful to these spots that they go back and go back and go back, and they won't move unless everything disappears.
Right.
So I remember vividly going to a lek, and we being me and a biologist, he was a bachelor, I remember that, and we sat in his truck, and his job that morning was to count the birds on the lek. And a lek is where the birds meet in the spring to mate. And so it's a good opportunity to count how many birds are around and get a handle on the population. So we never got out of his truck, and we sat in the dark, and we had the windows down, and we listened. And you hear the birds before you see them, and I love that. I love to hear them in the dark. That's my favorite thing, because in my head I can picture what they're doing just by the sound of it. And I can vividly remember doing it because around 9 o'clock, I'd say, it's pretty safe to get out and look around at that point, because they kind of float off back into the sagebrush to hide for the day, and so they're not on the lek. And so we got out to look around, and we were crawling around trying to figure out, like how many, had anybody lost any feathers? Had an eagle come in and taken anything? And as it got light enough in that situation, and I was trying to get my bearings, I looked down at my kneecaps, and I had crawled through bird poop.
Oh no.
And it was smeared all over my knees. And I instantly started retching and gagging, and I was just heaved over in the desert, and the biologist was like, "Geez, Millgate, I didn't realize you were such a girl," some rude comment like that. And I think he was just surprised that I would be puking over bird poop, but I absolutely was. And I looked at him and I said, "I don't have a weak stomach. I'm pregnant and I have morning sickness, and now you know before my own mother knows." So the first person to know that I was having my first baby was a bachelor who knew nothing about having kids.
I love it. So you're crawling around, and just kind of describe what a lek looks like as opposed to just a regular sagebrush.
When you get out in these sagebrush ecosystems, that you see this huge sea of sagebrush, and it's maybe thigh high in some places. There's some really pretty stands that we're lucky enough to have that are older than us, that are taller than us, but for the most part you're moving through thigh high brush, and underneath the canopy of that brush is this whole other world. And the sagebrush are built to hide under that world, and they do very well. They nest under there, they eat under there, they sleep under there, and it's a perfect system for the height of a 7-pound bird. But when they want to find a buddy, when they want to mate, they have to come out of hiding. And so they go to these spots in the desert that are open, bare ground, and those are called leks. And they keep the sagebrush on the edges so that they can run to cover if there's any danger. But they want to be out in the open in the spring to find a mate. And they're exposed and they're vulnerable. And so they've got to be really careful, because they're out in the open where they prefer to be hiding. And out here, everything wants to eat the desert chicken. And so there's a reason they're nervous. And so they put themselves on the lines and they go out in these big open spots and they strut. And I like to think of it like it's birds at a bar, right? You've got these males, they're strutting by and they think they look so fantastic, and the ladies aren't even giving them the time of day. And that's how it goes every morning. And I watch with anxiety because I just want all of them to get lucky. And actually, I've never even seen one get lucky, but they must because there's babies.
There are more.
Yeah. And so the males will put on this show where they puff up their chest and they fan their tail feathers and strut right past all the females, hoping that they get picked for mating. And that's how it goes every morning. And the sounds of the whole thing are all coming from the males. When they puff up their chest, it sounds like legs rubbing on satin sheets. And when they inflate and then pop those chests, it sounds like the cork on a champagne bottle. And it's just the repeat of that sound over and over. And then every once in a while, you'll hear the beating of like a really fast drum. And that's the male's wings flapping when they fight each other. But you don't hear much of anything from the females. They're pretty quiet. And actually, a lot of them look like they're eating. So that means they're even less interested, right?
The males are trying so hard.
They try so hard, so hard. They are so committed to what they're trying to do when they show off. And then there'll be kind of a lull in the action. And I like to think of it as like they're like taking a breath. It's like when you take off your tie and you just can go, ah. And they let the airbags stop inflating and they let their tail feathers fan kind of lay down, and they just kind of take a break. It's like being all puffed up with this posture must be exhausting. So every few minutes they stop doing it and just rest because they think the ladies aren't watching. I'm just going to take a break here for a second. So when sometimes the leks are just bare dirt with a ring of sagebrush around it. Other times it's stubble fields. So that's ag, right? Agriculture. They'll go out in those stubble fields because it's really short and nothing blocks the view. And then sometimes they're in cow corrals right next to a water trough because the cows have walked around the trough so much that the ground's bare. They just want a bare spot so that nothing blocks their show. The one we're going to today is kind of like, it's bare ground, kind of gravelly, and I suspect that they may have moved a little bit as the gravel has kind of bared out the ground. Sometimes they'll move, but there's a spot in the desert up by St. Anthony. That's a lek. And it was a lek before we put a road through it. And now that there's a road through it, the birds will be found standing on the road. And people think, well, that's dumb. Those birds are dumb. Yeah. They're not dumb, they're faithful. So they're in that spot because they've always been in that spot, regardless of the road we put through there.
They remember.
For research, that's a good thing because you know where to go back to every year to get that count. And we have some really long-standing historical counts on leks in Idaho. But on the other hand, because they are so faithful to those spots, they can be discovered and they can also be ruined. A wildfire comes through in August. Sage grouse that gather on that spot don't know that until they return in April.
Yeah. Now it's mid-March right now. Is this kind of early for them to be trying to mate?
Mid-March is perfect.
Is it?
And there are certain years we have a hard winter like we had 3 winters ago. Ooh, they'll be standing on top of that snow. They'll come out in the snow. I've seen them on snow. I've seen them on ice. They'll start gathering up. I like to say like end of February. I change how I let my bird dog run when they start to gather up because I don't want him mucking them up. I want them to be able to do their thing. And a few weeks ago, we were hiking in the high desert, and we saw, they were so far away from us, but I could see them, and I actually heard their wings. About 50 sage grouse flush.
Oh.
And that is such a remarkable thing to see, so rare, and it was such a treat. But it told me that they had started gathering up. And so once they start gathering up, that means they're going to go to these spots where they mate, and they'll be in large numbers in those spots, and they have something to do there, and I don't want to interrupt that. So I change where I let my dog wander at that point, and I go to spots where I know that the sage grouse are not there.
In your trailer for your new documentary, you have this map that you show of the change in sage grouse territory, and it's striking. It has been reduced so much, and I don't think people realize that, right? We zoom past sage grouse, we just call it the desert, but there's this whole ecosystem there.
Yeah, in Eastern Idaho, we like to say the big desert, and you know what? That's right, because it's a big deal.
Uh-huh.
It's the dominant landscape. And when you look across the west, it's the dominant landscape. High desert, that sagebrush steppe, is what we're all living in. And as much as we like to just zoom past it and block it out, its presence is unmistakable. And when you look at how that ecosystem has shrunk over the years, it is striking. We've lost a lot of sagebrush on purpose and on accident. And then when you have a species like sage grouse that relies 100% on sagebrush, the result is an 80% decline in the sage grouse population since 1965. 80%. Think of losing 80% of anything that you rely on.
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well.
Now, you, for this documentary, you spent a lot of, was it 2024, going to the Lex?
I went to Lex. I went to Idaho, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, and Oregon also. And I spent a lot of time not on Lex. Certainly, you have to be on Lex to show this footage that makes people stop and go, wait, what is this? I want to watch this. You want those shots. But then there's this whole story of what's going on out here, because if you can keep the sagebrush, you're going to keep the bird. And you're going to keep all kinds of things that live out in the desert. Everyone likes to think that it's romantic to have forest and timber, and that's beautiful for sure, but the desert's beautiful too. And people think that the elk and the deer and the grizzly bears and the mountain lions, all those megafauna, they're all up in the timber. Well, guess what? They're all out here in the desert. Everything uses the desert, even us. And so I wanted to make sure that I showed this system as a whole. It all started with a bird, and I got out here, crawled around, and quickly realized there's a whole system out here that we're skipping over, and that's a shame.
What got you interested in doing this story now?
When I covered salmon migration from the ocean to Idaho, that story was focused on fish. After that, I did on grizzly ground, and that story was focused on bears. So I knew the next one would not be a fish or a bear. And I thought it should be sage grouse because I've covered it for so long. It was kind of sitting up there with a couple of other ideas. And I went to a lek one morning and I sat in the blind. It's one of the most productive leks in the state of Idaho. And I had this lovely shot of sage grouse doing their thing. And they were kind of in a spot that was, of course, open, but then it had some rolling hills far back in the background, so it was a beautiful shot to frame up. And coming from frame right, all of a sudden out of nowhere was a pronghorn antelope. And it's not very often you see a pronghorn antelope not in panic mode, but he wasn't panicked. And he just walked right into my shot. He totally photobombed my shot. And in that exact second, I thought, oh, this is it. Like, this shot's going in a film, and this issue is worthy of helping people understand what's going on. And everything kind of came together then. And sometimes you see a shot like that and you know it's going to lead to something bigger. And it's a real exciting moment, for sure. And you're trying to be quiet and sit in the blind, and it's the best photobomb I've ever seen. And it's in the trailer.
Well, and I mean, that moment, if you're like me, you start dreaming of the possibilities, right? That the whole documentary may have been born in that second.
Absolutely. And you get so excited, and there I am sitting in the cold, in a blind, by myself. And I really want to tell you that I just came up with this great idea because this pronghorn just did this fantastic strut through the strut of the sage grouse. Like, could there be anything better than that? That was a sign for sure.
Well, it sounds like you were a little surprised. Like, you were out there looking for sage grouse and you see a pronghorn. Were there other surprises as this developed?
Oh, geez. Every time you're in the desert, there's a surprise. And sometimes they're delightful and sometimes they're awful. You run into all kinds of things out here. I even had someone recently ask me if I saw any bodies. And I said, human bodies? No, but lots of other animal bodies, yes.
Carcasses.
Yes, and garbage. The load of garbage is just jaw-dropping out here. I mean, I pick up garbage every time I'm out here. And I think that it would be so fantastic if people realized the desert is not a dump. I mean, we're dumping on the wild house out here. We don't want anyone dumping on our house. So that's something that really stuck out. I really want people to understand that we need to be more respectful of this landscape. And when you think back 100 years ago, the whole point of homesteading was to develop the West. What's the first thing you do to develop the West? You rip out the sagebrush. And now, a century later, instead of trying to rip out all the sagebrush we can, we're trying to save as much as we can. So it's a change in the mindset. And where we've had this behavior of dumping on the desert for so many decades, I'm hopeful that we'll have a change of mindset and clean up after ourselves.
Do you think shining a light on what's actually out here on these animals, this ecosystem, will help do that?
Showcasing sage grouse and their whole dynamic persona makes you pay attention to the issue. And then I can take you deeper and show you this whole system while I have you engaged. I may use the bird to engage you, but I want you to connect with the desert in a way that we've dismissed for way too long. And I think the way you do that is by helping people engage in an entertaining but educational way so that they feel like it's worth their time to pay attention.
What's fun with the work you do, you are creating a documentary, but you're also writing a book. And this will be your fourth book. Tell me kind of what we can expect when we read that.
What you can expect from My Place Among Birds is the thing that I am the most happiest about. It is the first book I have ever written without stitches.
Well, your last book, you learned you had MS, and
yes.
I mean, a lot of things went into that one.
Yeah, and there were stitches in that one also. You lose chunks of your body to skin cancer, you're going to get stitches. And so, yeah, every book, 3 of the 4 books I've written have involved stitches, and sometimes broken bones, and sometimes disease. So that's what I'm most thrilled about. But what the My Place collection does is it goes behind the scenes of making these wildlife films. People want to know about the wildlife, and I want to showcase the wildlife in the film, but then they get curious about what it's like to be out here crawling around in the desert. And so I don't want to take away from the wilds story. So I put the backstory in a book, and that's what's in My Place Among Birds.
As you're doing these documentaries, especially with the sage grouse one that we're talking about today, what kind of experts are you finding to interview?
The first thing I do when I pick a subject is I sit down and think about who has a stake in this subject matter. whether it's because of their profession or just their lifestyle. I always want to know the history behind this subject. I always want to know perspectives from the tribes. I always want to know, they kind of fall in that history perspective, but in a different way than a historical ecologist. I want biologists. I always want biologists. Wildlife biologists are usually my primary source on a story that involves a wild animal. And I have a specialist for sage grouse. I have a specialist for grizzly bears. I have a specialist for salmon. Whatever it is I'm working on, I want the biologist that is the best at that species. I want people that live in that landscape. I want people that rely on that landscape for their livelihoods. So I think about ranchers, recreation, hunters are in there. So there's a good mix of scientists and activists and tribes, conservationists, recreationists. I want to hear from them all. And it's very important to include all the perspectives. I don't want to tell you what to think on an issue. I just want you to think. And so I want to gather experts that come from all different perspectives and make sure it's a balanced approach. And on issues that have a pinch point, where people are butting heads, I want to be able to dig in on that pinch point and hear the perspectives from both sides, and often from all sides. Sometimes there's more than two sides. I don't want to shy away from the stories that are hard, and I don't want to back off from interviews that sometimes seem hard to sit through.
Maybe this will be my final question then. People who see your documentary or read your book, or even just look at the social media that you've done, the behind the scenes type of stuff, what do you hope they take away with them?
Anytime I make a film about wildlife or wildlands, my first priority is awareness. I'm in this element every day. I'm aware of it, but I realize not everybody has that privilege, and I want them to be aware of it. And so it's a privilege for me to bring them a story that helps raise their awareness for the natural world around them. And for sage grouse, yeah, there's this dynamic bird out there that, if you're up early enough to see it, you're just lucky. But then there's this landscape that they're trying to live in, and we overlook it. We should not overlook it. So the takeaway is the desert is not a dump, and we rely on it just as much as the other animals do. So we should respect it for what it's worth, way more than we are doing now.
Thank you. I said that was my last question, but I guess I lied.
Okay, I'm still driving. I'm not lost, so we're good.
Yes, we're on I-15. This is easy. Will you maybe characterize what we saw today? Like,
we saw
not so much a summary, but like, what did we see?
What we saw in the desert today was life. Honest, real, untainted life. How many people get to see that every day? And to know that wildlife is still out there in a time when it seems like so much is upside down, that means we also saw hope. There's still birds out there. There's still sagebrush out there. And it's up to us to make sure that we can say it's still out there decades from now.
It was so cool to be there, hear them, and to see them doing the thing they do.
The coolest thing to me was that I didn't tank. That I didn't tank on you.
We didn't get skunked.
I mean, my surprise when I started seeing white dots, I was like, am I seeing things? I'm going to look like I know what I'm doing right now.
And I was looking out the window out the right. So I had no idea, and you're like...
I was like, there's not dots up there usually. Like, that's the road. What is going on? And there they were, like a premonition. It was like a mirage. They just like came out of the heat waves and put on a show to delight us for the ages.
But we're the only people who saw that.
In the whole entire world.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, to know that. That's the thing about it. It's a 7-pound bird. It's just itty bitty out there in that massive landscape. And guess what? We're just as itty bitty in that massive landscape. That's humbling. And to know that no one else was out there that saw that today, that's special.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for waking up early.